Okay, moving on to the next team in the Pac-12 that we will be going over today. That will be the team that I have projected to come in sixth place, Andy Enfield and his USC Trojans. And it's pretty crazy that Andy Enfield is now entering his eighth season as the head coach of the Trojans, because it seems like just yesterday he was out here taking these Florida Gulf Coast teams all the way to the Sweet 16. And I feel like when evaluating the job Andy Enfield has been able to do so far at USC, there are a couple ways to look at it. Number one, you can't deny that this guy has brought in a boatload of talent between the two Mobleys on the team this year, Kevin Porter, Benny Boatwright. There have been so many really good players, Chimezi Metu as well, that have came from this USC program and have eventually gone pro. The problem is that doesn't always translate to wins. Earlier in this program, I said when discussing UCLA that there were people comparing UCLA and Texas this year because of the way both teams ended last season. And I feel like a better comparison for Texas in the Pac-12 would be USC as opposed to UCLA, because both programs are known for bringing in significant talent, especially as of late, and both programs have not been able to get the job done in the tournament. Now, I've said this a lot regarding college basketball. Usually in a normal non-COVID season, I base a lot of my predictions and a lot of my expectations with teams. I base my predictions and expectations on what exactly happened in the NCAA tournament. Did your team have the ability to get over a hump that maybe you've never gotten over before? And I feel like with USC last year, I would have been very curious to see what these Trojans would have done in the NCAA tournament, just because I do feel like last year there were some points during the season that USC looked like a different team from some of the other past USC teams that have had just a boatload of talent and have not gotten into the NCAA tournament. Like the team 2 years ago that was literally the last team left off the bubble with Metu and D'Anthony Melton, who got suspended early. And then 2 years ago with Kevin Porter, they had all the talent in the world, but unfortunately they weren't able to make the NCAA tournament. And last year, USC actually had some really good wins, including a home win against LSU, which was really good. They went on the road to UCLA and won. They also beat Arizona at home. They beat Arizona State at home when they were playing their best basketball in a while. They also beat UCLA on the last game of the season on a buzzer beater. So I feel like USC last year did really build some nice players, and I feel like I would have been very curious to see what they would have done in March Madness, because I do think there would have been a chance that maybe with all of that talent, they could have made a run. Now, unfortunately, when you look at this year's USC squad, they do lose a lot of that talent. It starts off with, obviously, Onyeka Okongwu, who is going to be a top 10 pick in the NBA draft. They also lose Nick Rakocevic, who is one of the best big men in the history of USC basketball. And then they lose some guards also that were really productive on the offensive side of the ball in Utomi Adelesh and Jonah Matthews. And I do feel like last year, looking at this roster again and looking at all these guards, I'm telling you, last year would have been the year for USC to make a little bit of a run in the NCAA tournament. And I do think that this year, the season should be considered successful if they make the NCAA tournament. Because even though USC has a lot of talent on this team, just looking at it on paper, when I compare this USC team to some of the other USC teams of the past, they're not that good. But that doesn't mean that they can't outperform them and be better, because some of the other teams in the Pac-12 during that span have gotten better. They've gotten worse. So we'll have to see what happens. But USC right now is really going to rely on the Mobley brothers. Isaiah Mobley, who is a 6'10 sophomore, he averaged 6.2 points per game, 5.3 rebounds per game, and 1 assist per game last year. I feel like he never really got an opportunity to be one of the featured guys in that USC front court just because of who was in front of him. They had Onyeka Okongwu and Nick Rakocevic playing together, which they had to, and I think ultimately Mobley had to play a little bit more on the perimeter, which obviously isn't his game, and I do think this year he's going to be much better and much more improved in a kind of bigger role. But the key is his brother, Evan Mobley, the number one high school recruit in the country to many, And I feel like Evan Mobley, from what I've seen so far and everything that I've heard, he's a little more prospect than player right now. So to be honest, I'm not necessarily sure if USC should expect all of these unreal high expectations from him just because he's more of a prospect than a player right now. So at the same time, even though a lot of people are going to see that USC has one of the best recruits in college basketball, to be honest, I don't expect him to make that much of an impact. But there are a couple reasons why I like this USC team. Number one, Ethan Anderson was one of the best stories in college basketball last year. This guy is a former 3-star recruit, and USC last year, if you remember, I was high on them, but I was just worried that they didn't have a point guard, and I feel like Ethan Anderson was really able to establish himself as a freshman, which is really impressive because when you look at the numbers, they're not going to jump out at you right off the bat. 5.5 points per game, 2.8 rebounds per game, 4.2 assists per game. Those numbers aren't really going to jump off to you on the paper, but at the same time, when you're a 3-star recruit and you have your team in a position to make the NCAA tournament when the season was shut down, you deserve a lot of credit because there have been plenty of other really good players, 5-star recruits, 4-star recruits in college basketball that really were not able to do the same thing that Ethan Anderson did last year. Look at De'Vion Harmon at Oklahoma. This guy was a freshman, top 40 recruit, thrown right into the mold, and he looked rattled. And for Ethan Anderson to be a 3-star recruit, win the starting point guard job over Elijah Weaver, super impressive job by him. And USC does lose some shooting with their grad transfers, Adelesh and Utomi. Also, Jonah Matthews, who was their most consistent three-point shooter. It's going to be very weird watching a USC Trojans basketball game and Jonah Matthews isn't going to be on the floor because I feel like he was at USC forever. But they do bring in some shooters. Noah Bauman, the 6'5 redshirt junior from San Jose State. He averaged 10.8 points per game in 2018-2019 there. And also Isaiah White, 6'7 senior from Utah Valley. He averaged 14.5 points per game, 8.4 rebounds per game, and 1.3 assists per game last year. Also, Tajay Eddy, the redshirt senior from Santa Clara, they're buying low on him. He averaged 15 points a game 2 years ago there, but only 9 last year, so they're kind of buying low. And then also Chavez Goodwin, the transfer from Wofford, 6'9", he averaged 12.6 rebounds per game last year. The other kid I wanted to mention on this USC team is Max Agbonkpalo. I think he's kind of similar to that Benny Boatwright mold, just they're going to need him to develop a little bit more offensively, and obviously he didn't have that good or as good of a freshman season that Benny Boatwright did. So there is some talent on this USC team. When I'm comparing them to some of the other squads in the Pac-12, I think maybe they'll be able to win games just solely based on size and talent, but they're really going to go where the Mobleys take them. And I think right now I'm going to have USC barely out of the NCAA tournament field. I think it's going to be very, very close, but I think the Trojans just miss. And hey, if they do, I don't really know what Andy Enfield's job security is like because odds are the Mobleys are both going to be gone after this year. And then after that, I'm not really sure where you go from here. I'm telling you, if the tournament would have happened last year, I do think USC would have made a run with all of those guys and the way they were built. So I have the Trojans finishing in 6th, maybe a little high, but I look at this team's talent and think it's pretty good, pretty top-notch. It's just going to really depend how far the Mobleys take USC. The other thing is Elijah Weaver. He transferred from USC to Dayton earlier in the offseason, and I do believe that if he was still a Trojan, he would probably be their starting 2-guard right now. So apparently he wanted to play point guard. He probably didn't feel great that he was got beat out by Ethan Anderson. But at the same time, I do think that USC is in a better spot with Anderson as opposed to Weaver. Anderson is a little bit more of a natural point guard, and I do think if guys like Bauman and White and Eddy hit shots, USC will be in a very good position.